Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, may I ask you to switch off your mobile phones and to stand up for the academic procession. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mrs. Roshaneh Zafar. Welcome to Atrium B, this beautiful location in the heart of the University of Antwerp, in the heart of our wonderful city as well, for the conferral of the 2023 Honorary Degree for General Merit. My name is Anke. I'll be your hostess this evening, and it's an incredible pleasure to be here surrounded by so much knowledge, intelligence, talent, and hard work. Let's make it a warm and interesting evening. Honorary Dr. Roshaneh Zafar will shortly be teaching a masterclass titled A Gender Intentional Approach to Microfinance, the Cash Journey. During the masterclass, you can ask questions using the chat function on the YouTube channel. This is for the people at home watching. And after the masterclass, there will be time for a Q&A session in which Mrs. Zafar will answer the questions you submitted. Of course, the people in this room can also participate in the Q&A session by using the very old-fashioned technique of raising your hand. Then we will proceed to the conferral of the honorary degree, but first I would like to give the floor to Rector Herman van Goethem, who will offer you all an even warmer welcome.
Dear attendees, I welcome you all to this ceremony at the University of Antwerp, you here or at home. This evening we are awarding a doctorate, a honorary doctorate degree of general merit to Mrs. Roshaneh Zafar. Distinguished Mrs. Zafar, it is a great honor for the University of Antwerp to welcome you this evening, together with your husband, Mr. Kausar, whom I hereby also warmly greet. Sincere thanks, Mrs. Zafar, for accepting this honorary doctorate. The honorary degree we are conferring on you today is entirely in line with the mission and vision of our university, the University of Antwerp, which in recent years also has included Denis Mukwege and Jeffrey Sachs as honorary doctorates. The University of Antwerp does not only aspire to high-quality education and research, service to society is also an essential part of every professor's mission. The University of Antwerp embraces diversity as an enrichment for people and the world, and as an essential part of a democratic society founded on human rights. Within this university, the diversity takes shape through a policy of inclusiveness, in mutual respect, based on the basic principles of equality between people. The University of Antwerp wants to attract students and staff from different backgrounds and give them equal opportunities to develop their talents. The university is committed to supporting and guiding students who have been given unequal opportunities due to socio-economic and other constraints. And this all explains the background of our choice today. Dear attendees, this ceremony has two parts. First, there will be a master class which will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Johan Bastiaansen. Dear Johan, as you know, my special thanks for that. And after the master class, we will move on the ceremonial part, the awarding of the honorary doctorate, including, of course, a very enthusiastic laudatio. Mrs. Zafar and colleague Bastiaans, may I invite you to take a seat here for the master class once the seat will be here. Okay. Okay. And yet, en nu?
Good evening, everyone. It's just such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much. I'm privileged and honored to be given this doctorate degree today. Actually, I was just sharing that when I joined graduate school, I thought I would get a doctorate, but I never knew that 30 years on, or maybe more, that'll give my age away a bit, I would be conferred this degree. So today, we're going to talk in two parts. One part is my journey, my narrative of how we put together an organization that works on the economic empowerment of women. And on the other hand, we are then going to look at some data, because if we are working on trying to empower women, it's also important to have the evidence to back it. That's what I learned as a women leader, that unless you have the data to support what you do, people may not believe you. And I do know that in a room full of academics, that is something we should talk about today. So, okay. Will this move? No. Sorry, I think I am, this is not working. Can we get somebody? It is working. So when we think of women today in a traditional society, these are the words that come to us: domination, prejudice, denial, patriarchy, powerlessness, inequality. But today I'm going to change the narrative from women being victims of society, of women being victims of structure. I'm going to talk to you about women who are taking charge of their lives. Recently I was asked the question, why is patriarchy the norm in societies like Pakistan? And I asked myself this question. And it's when political, economic, social, cultural, religious structures all work together to dominate the lives of women. It's when simple concepts like equating the family honor with women's virtue, that's when we have the domination of patriarchy in society. It's when we look at familial patriarchy, which is very important, because I'm going to talk a lot about families today, about how families make decisions, because women work within a certain familial setup. So it's when familial patriarchy is governed by gender norms, by how gender roles and responsibilities are determined. It's when men, and I also think it's because of that, when men do not have positive role models, and they have this inflated notion of manhood. All of these things combine to create and give patriarchy the mindset, and we will be talking a lot about mindsets as well. So if we move, yes. So if we look at the context of inequality, and it's important to have a conceptualization of that, there are three types of inequality that we will be looking at, and that's how the Kashf narrative is also molded. The first is what we talk about is vital inequality, which relates to access to healthcare. It relates to control over your bodies and your control over your nutrition, the food you eat. The second type of inequality is what we call resource inequality, which is where Kashf started from. That is the notion of what we are talking about: women's economic opportunities, wage equality. It talks about access to education. The third kind of inequality is existential inequality, what we refer to the domination of patriarchy, which limits the choices and which limits agency and control for women. In the context of Pakistan, and this is really the model that the World Economic Forum uses as part of the gender gap report, Pakistan is ranked out of 146 countries at 145. We are not doing well on economic empowerment of women, because when we look at the labor force participation rate in Pakistan, it's one of the lowest. 20% of women are in the formal labor force right now. But when we look at other things that are happening, there are tectonic changes that are taking place. When we look at universities in Pakistan, 65% of the enrollment is women, and they're academically leaving the men far behind. So why are they not translating into the formal economy? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. On education, for example, education attainment in terms of enrollment of girls, we are not doing too well at the primary and the secondary stages. Where we are doing well is the political economy, where we are 95 out of 146 countries. And interestingly enough, I read an assessment done by UN Women, which showed us that the women legislators who are sitting in the National Assembly today, they attend their attendance is higher than men, and there have been more women-focused legislation in Pakistan over the past decade. So they seem to be doing their work, but it's not translating into a better environment for women. And again, that becomes a question mark. So let me go back. Again, this is not working. Okay, let's try it. Okay, so again, if we go back to my history, and I started I studied finance, and then I went into development economics. And when I entered development economics, the norm, or the way we looked at the world when it came to gender, was women in development. And it was perceived that women were the losers, and therefore, and we had people like the economist Esther Bosserup, who taught us how mechanization farming in Africa had left the women behind. Women were traditionally the ones manning and managing agriculture. So they were being left behind. When I entered the job market in the 1990s, I worked as a women in development specialist for the World Bank. And that really was the foray, where the idea was that you would do specific projects for women, and that is how you would change their lives. But over time, we moved from women in development to gender in development, where we saw that inequality hinders development. And we really need to look at power structures to change policies and to look at economics in a holistic manner, where ultimately we need to have gender desegregated data. And today we talk about gender mainstreaming. And this is really how the history of the work that I do also panned out. So my first job was really working in doing a time series, a time series assessment in a part of Pakistan which is extremely remote, where you have the most beautiful stark setup, and you have the most beautiful stark geography, where there are dome-styled homes where women intricately paint, but it's also resource scarce. And women had to travel for 3 hours to collect water. And my job was to see that this huge World Bank project that had been done there, how did this save women's time? So I spent many days doing a time series analysis of women to see how much time did they save. And I discovered that women saved 97 minutes every day because the water source was closer to them. So one evening I was sitting with them, and of course I was naive. I was 25 years old at that time, and I had come right out of college, and I was sitting with these women, and I said, okay, so what are you going to do now that you have all this time? Are you going to sit and gossip with your friends? Is leisure something you will have? You will just spend that time for yourself? And they laughed at me and they said, leisure? We've never had any leisure in our lives. And what we are going to do is really work on making these beautiful quilts. And we are going to sell these in the market, and that money that we will get from that, we will use it for the benefit of our families. So I began to ask them how much would they earn from that. And I discovered that women had very little bargaining voice. They had very little means to go to the market to sell. As a result, there were middlemen coming and taking those beautiful quilts that they were making and selling them at the market at a very high rate, but the women were getting a pittance for that. I also realized that mobility was a problem for these women because they could not get to the market to sell and they could not negotiate with the suppliers at the end of the day. So these were some of the questions that began to arise for me, and I began to look at why were these women not being paid enough and what could we do to help them. So my purpose was really to build a gender intentional approach where we look at the results and we move back and we say, okay, to achieve these results, what kind of transformation strategies should we build? So these were the questions that were in my mind. And then they say, when you seek something, it seeks you too. Or as Paulo Coelho said, when you desire something, the entire universe conspires for you to achieve it. And that's what happened with me and Dr. Yunus. So in 1993, I had a chance meeting with him. And we were sitting at a table and conversing with each other. I didn't even know it was Dr. Yunus. And as he was talking to me, I realized this was the father of microfinance. He was the one who started microfinance in Bangladesh. And he told me a very interesting story. As I was asking him how he set up the bank and why he set up the bank, and he said, I can tell you a lot of stories, but this is a story that will make you think. And the story was that when Dr. Yunus started in Bangladesh and he set up this bank for women, and the Central Bank of Bangladesh had given them the license, and they had had their first superintendency supervision visit to the bank. And there, the bank was supposed to write to them and tell them whether they'd met the banking standards or not. So 2 days went by and the supervisors didn't send a letter. Anyway, 10 days later, they sent a letter to Dr. Yunus. And all the letter said was, Dr. Yunus, can you tell me why all the clients of your bank are women? That's all the letter said. So he thought to himself, he said, what should I do? What should I answer to them? What should my response be? So he mulled over it one evening, and the next day he wrote back to the superintendent through the central bank governor and said, Dear central bank governor, why are all the clients of formal financial institutions men? And he left it at that. And that's really where the microfinance movement started. Let me tell you, it was a gender-neutral movement. What that means is it did not focus just on women or men. It focused on poor people. But with time, it was women who took that over. And that is really the question we have to ask ourselves. Why are women more credible? How did the microfinance movement help them? So one of the things that Dr. Yunus told me when I started microfinance, he said, Roshaneh, microfinance is not going to be your challenge. It's not rocket science. You can design all the products, you can do the research, you can get great professionals, you'll be able to do this really well. But it's mindset change that will be your biggest challenge. And that's why I talked about patriarchy in the beginning, because it's a very complex thing. When you talk about the transaction of microfinance, it's the easier part. But it's really the transformation that we are here to talk about today. And we will also, and I will answer to the academics in the room as well, we will also look at the numbers. And like any economist, at one hand I will say it was this, on the other hand I will tell you that it was the other way. It really depends on how you skin the cat. So mindset change it is, and what did we do? So when I went back after spending 4 months in Bangladesh, I traveled the length and breadth of Bangladesh. I traveled from Rangpur down to Patuakhali, the amazing Bay of Bengal. I lived with women who told me their stories of how they started, of how at one time they didn't even have clothes to wear. They were that poor. But with microfinance and with their ability to get loans and with their ability to save, they began to live a life of dignity, which is what it was all about. So when I came back to Pakistan, and this again is an interesting story, I had no clue that I would set up an organization. I just thought I would work for the Grameen Bank because it made sense to me. However, Dr. Yunus was clever. He called me in and he said, Roshaneh, if you want to do something in microfinance, we don't have place for you in Bangladesh. We have enough microfinance professionals here. Go and do it in Pakistan. And here's a check for $10,000. I'll keep it for you. It's an IOU. The day you decide to set up an organization, get back to me. And if you fail, tell the rest of the world it wasn't your fault, it was Dr. Yunus's fault. But I can tell you, you won't fail. Anyway, so I came back and I started doing research on this. And there were lots of naysayers. And there continue to be naysayers in microfinance. And I think part of the problem is that we have overcommitted and underperformed in some ways, and I will come to that in a second as well. But the myths and beliefs that we confronted at that time, people told me, women don't work in Pakistan. It can't work here. People told me, you won't find women to work for you in the field because this is not a job that women in Pakistan will do. They will not mobilize. They will not walk from community to community to do, to talk to women and to mobilize them and motivate them. They also told me, Pakistani people are not honest. Bangladeshis are, but Pakistanis are not. So you better not do it. This is not a good idea. They also told me that low-income people are not business people. They're not entrepreneurs. They won't create jobs. They won't make a difference. It's just not going to work. Don't do it. They also told me that Pakistan is an Islamic country, and interest is haram, which means it's not allowed in the religion. Well, we came up with a very interesting counter to that. We didn't call it an interest rate. We said it's a service charge. So it's all about nomenclature at the end of the day. So there were lots of naysayers, but we decided not to believe any of them. What we learned in our initial research was, yes, we visited about 300 women. This is now, I'm talking 1995. So we visited 300 women who were running enterprises. And we looked at what were they doing. And we discovered that all of them needed capital. But there was a need for capital that varied. So what we learned from low-income families was, first, that poor people need access to, they have contingencies, so they will have mismatches in their income and they'll have mismatches in their expenses. So we need to come up with some consumption and productive needs. We also learned that poor people require long-term lump sums, so they have business opportunities. We also realized that low-income families have risks and contingencies. It's like a game of snakes and ladders. I'm sure you've played that. You go up, you accumulate assets, and then there's a family contingency, somebody falls sick, you go right down, and then you have to start again. And there are very few opportunities for poor people to accumulate assets or to have lump sums. So we realized they want reliability, they want continuous access, they want convenience, they want flexibility, and they want immediate access, because opportunities for poor families when it comes to productive enterprises are usually seasonal. So these were some of the things we learned when we were trying to design this. However, there were many challenges in the beginning. So for 2 years, when I started Kashf, I worked as a frontline officer. I really wanted to connect with the women. I needed to understand what was it that they wanted. The first thing was building trust. So at one time when I would go, so there was this one community that I had adopted. And I remember when we were selecting that community and I asked Dr. Yunus, where should I begin? And he said, start in your backyard, because people need access to financing in our part of the world. So I started in my backyard, which is the city of Lahore. It's the culture capital of Pakistan, and we selected 1 or 2 communities around the city, and I started working there. And the first thing I realized was that it's about trust building. And it required a lot of talking to the women, because on the other side, women were self-excluding themselves. They didn't trust themselves, they felt they didn't have the experience. Even though they were running businesses, they were not recognized for the contributions that they were making to their families. They didn't have family support, they didn't have mobility, they didn't have access to markets a lot of times, and most importantly, there was nobody to lend them a hand when it came to unpaid care. And this continues to be a challenge for women entrepreneurs that are working in the micro sector. Then another problem that came up. Now, traditionally, the microfinance methodology works on solidarity groups. What that means is 5 women get together and they're jointly responsible for repaying each other's loans. Now, we had to bring women from different families together, and there was resistance from their men, from their families, from everybody. And we had to really break that mold and get women from different backgrounds together. It was also very difficult to get women to attend our trainings. So as I said to you, transaction was easy, but the transformation of how do you train women and how do you get them, and a majority of the women that we were working with were not literate. So we took from the Paulo Freirean concept of pedagogy when it came to adult learning, and designed trainings that were mostly through visual, through practice, through storytelling at that time to engage with the women. But even then, we had designed a 10-day training. In those days, we were naive. It was just the beginning. And we believed that women would come who were so busy, who used to get up at 5 in the morning, go to sleep at 11 p.m. every day. They were so busy, they had no time. And like I had learned earlier also, they don't have time for leisure like we do. Leisure is a luxury for people like us, but they didn't. So we had designed this 10-day training where we were going to teach them how to sign their names. We were going to teach them numeracy because we felt that was important to have a transparent relationship. But one day they would come, and the second day they would run off, and women would, there were times I would go into the village and I wouldn't see the women. I would knock at doors, and there would be no women in the community. Later, they told me that we used to know which day you were going to come, and we used to have our children standing on the roof of the homes to tell us when you were entering the village, and we would just go out because we didn't want to meet you. We didn't want to do these trainings. So then we had to realign our entire program, change the training program, change the policies and procedures. We had a 15-page long loan application form. Today it takes us almost 2 minutes to fill out the loan application form. So we had to learn the hard way in a lot of these. But the most important thing that we had to learn was women's productive needs. Microfinance traditionally does productive lending. But what we realized is that unless or until we twin that with consumption loans, it's not going to work. Because women have life cycle needs. They are the ones who sit at the table every day and if they don't have money to feed their families, they are the ones that feel it most. They are the ones that have that connection and that empathy. So it became very important, and this was a move away from traditional microfinance approaches that look only at productive lending. Productive lending is very important because it builds up the capacity of the household, but it's also very important to have consumption lending to help them not disinvest their current assets. So what has been the Kash journey? As I shared with you, in 1996, we started with 265 clients, very, very small as an action research. And I always tell my frontline staff, don't be a loan officer like me. Because the mistakes I made are really some of the lessons that we have been able to translate into the future. Because the first crisis we had was 9 months into lending, was the first delinquency crisis, which means people stopped paying us. And when we went back to the table to see what was happening, it had all that women in development approach that I was telling you. We believed, and it was also feminism to a certain extent, where the belief was that if you have to work with women, you must only work with the women but not look at their context. However, that was naive of us, because what we realized is that the 265 women we had lent to, 70% of those loans were, guess, used by whom? By the men in the family, because they were not part of the decision. So we had to actually go back and revisit our model. And that's when we came up with the family model. And that's when we came up with the value-driven approach, where we also started, you may feel that's a bit of a stretch and we shouldn't have done that, but we also started doing gender trainings for men. Because we felt unless or until we brought men into this conversation, this was not going to be a sustainable and a viable approach. So the initial, along with understanding the market, along with redoing the whole model that we were running, we also had to then come up with another challenge for ourselves. In the first few years, we managed to set up the first few branches. While we were working on the branches, we faced one of the biggest challenges at that time, in addition to the delinquency crisis. One of our loan officers was shot in the field, and she died. Personally, for me, that was, at that time, I thought, I should stop doing this. I should not put women at risk and, expose them to vulnerabilities that I wasn't even aware of. But then we did two things. So far, our first mantra, the first few years, 5 years of the organization, we were a microfinance organization that was totally run by women for women. We didn't have men in the organization. But then we started recruiting men also as frontline officers. And our first challenge there was, would the women clients be able to meet with the male clients? But luckily for us, because the trust was there, that wasn't an issue. So we changed in two ways. We changed our approach in terms of dealing with families and having women and men as co-borrowers, so the loans would not be pipelined by the men. We also changed the makeover of the organization early on and brought the men in and started having gender balance in all our branches. And then we set ourselves up another challenge, which was to become the first sustainable microfinance company in Pakistan that was lending to women. It hadn't been done before. So by 2003, we did manage to do that, and we were the first microfinance company that not only lent to women, we actually demonstrated the business case not only for microfinance in Pakistan, but also for women entrepreneurs in Pakistan. And we raised one of the first loans in the industry from the commercial bank. But there's another story to that. So one of the challenges we had in this phase was raising money, obviously, raising capital, convincing people that they needed to invest in a company that was targeting women from low-income communities. But what we learned, what I learned from that is we got a guarantee from Deutsche Bank, and we thought, okay, this is going to work. And we went to one of the banks, which is called the first women bank in Pakistan. This was set up by Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan to provide SMEs, who were women-led SMEs, with credit. So we thought, oh, this is the right fit for us. Let's go to them. It's run by a woman. She would understand us, and we have a 50% guarantee from Deutsche Bank to get a loan. Well, when I walked into the bank, guess what they said to me? And it's interesting because patriarchy is very deeply entrenched, and sometimes even we don't realize that we are part of that. And so when I walked in, she said, oh, wonderful. The bank officer was a woman. She said, wonderful, great idea, women to women. Oh, this is just so sexy for us. We'll invest. Can your father sign on the loan application form? And I was like, why does my father need? He'll sign, but why does he have to sign? I'm an individual. I run this company, and why do I need to do that? But these are the kind of intricate reactions and subliminal patriarchy that we had to face at that time. Other things that we were facing, for example, nobody would rent us a building. They were like, a woman, not for profit, working for women? We're not going to give you a place to rent. So, but, of course, that doesn't hold true anymore. But these were some of the initial reactions. And then our next phase beyond this was really to scale up. And to scale up, we introduced what many of you will again find funny, is microfinance meets McDonald's approach. So what began to happen? In the first phase, we were very organic. We were spending a lot of time with the women. We were doing a lot of research. We were designing the products and redesigning them. But if you want to scale up, the buck has to stop somewhere. And you have to think about standardization, decentralization, and you have to be more efficient. So the efficiency set in. And what started happening was, I'll give you another example again of how gender norms play out, and you don't even realize them. So I would go to these conferences, and the first question a male microfinance manager would ask me, so how many clients do you have? And I would say, well, I have 65,000. Oh, we have 3 million. And you would just say, okay, maybe my 65,000 is a bit too low for them to consider us as, consider us to be important. So what had started happening in microfinance from 2003 to 2008 was scale. Scale at the expense of transformation. Scale at the expense of value and impact. And a lot of the research that we are going to talk about also happened at that time. We had the RCTs, we'll talk a bit about them, also the randomized control tests that counter the impact side. But a lot of microfinance practitioners at that time were going for big numbers, and we also got into the game. So we moved from 65,000 in 2003 to over 300,000 by 2008. And so the numbers were what we were all looking at, and the whole sector in Pakistan had gotten a lot of money. The World Bank had put in money. That also happens. When success happens, the World Bank jumps in. That's what I've learned. So the World Bank came in, gave everybody money, and we were growing at about 60% every year as a sector for the past 5 years. not realizing that there was something that was waiting around the corner for us. And what was waiting around the corner for us was hyperinflation. Pakistan in 2008, August, had a 40% inflation rate, which we also have today, but things are a little different. We will come to that also in a minute. So what was happening is, and we were interestingly doing research to see what percentage of low-income families were spending that because of the inflation on food security. And what we discovered is from 2007, from 34% of the family budget going into food, 58% was going into food. So what was going to happen? Some coping mechanisms had to come into play. At the same time, on the other hand, the sector was oblivious of this. We didn't know how much of the loans that we were giving out were what we call now over-indebted. How many of our clients were over-indebted? How many were in parallel loans? That because we had no credit information bureau to back that. So lots of things were happening which we were not aware of, and maybe we got blindsided. And so in 2008, there was an existential crisis that hit Kashf. 85% of our clients stopped paying. Many people thought this organization will not succeed. Not only did that happen, other things came into play. Women stopped paying us not because they were willfully defaulting. Women stopped paying us because there was a rumor that was spread. And we still don't know. We did a lot of research on this. We did a lot of forensic to understand what happened. But there was a rumor that was spread that the owner, the founder of the organization, who's standing in front of you right now, had died. And loans had been written off by her. In Islam, the notion of, if you pass on and you have a loan on your head, it's not considered to be religiously acceptable. You have to make sure all your debts are paid off before you pass on. That's the notion in Islam. So somebody was very bright. We think it was probably some unhappy staff, or it was our competitors. We still didn't figure that out. But this spread like wildfire. And this was also the days that our clients had started obtaining mobile phones. So this spread like wildfire. And the same women whom I would go and meet and speak to refused to acknowledge me. It was probably the worst time of my life. But as they say, the worst of time and the best of times come together, and no crisis goes to waste. Every crisis has a silver lining. The same women who we had worked with, the leaders that we had trained, the men that we had spoken to, brick-battered our office. I remember sitting in my office and there were bricks flying all over us. It reminded me of the time, interestingly enough, this happened with Grameen also in 2002 when Dr. Yunus had actually invited me to work with his team to do a forensic on how they would revamp Grameen. So I knew that this could happen, but of course I never thought it would happen to me. And add to that, there were 11 murder cases against me that people had used the legal system to say that, she pushed me and I lost my baby. There was one client who had gotten this case against me in the High Court, which then I had to go and fight and clear my name. But all these things were happening. So we began to do a forensic, and we realized that women were not happy with an inflexible group lending methodology. There was what now we call group fatigue. That had set in. Many of the women who'd worked with us for 10 years said, well, why can't you trust us? Why can't you give us individual loans? Why can't you change the way you approach us? That was one. Then there was a lot of over-indebtedness. They had borrowed from one and borrowed and repaid the other. So there was pyramiding of loans. There was also that. Then there were poor microfinance practices. We also know that many, because the number game was there, everybody was pushing credit, not really doing an assessment. So what did we do? 85% of our money wasn't coming back. We had to pay our loans to the debtors who were out there. So, one of the things we had done in 2008, luckily for us, we had kept our investments liquid. So we could pay our lenders. However, we really needed to recover our money. We had about 18 months to do this. So we went back to the drawing board. And we revamped the entire microfinance products that we had. And we now do what we call the value chain for women entrepreneurship, which is essentially an individual lending model where we do a credit appraisal. We do an assessment of the business. We see how much their net disposable income is. It's a very commercial bank approach in that sense in terms of assessment, but it's a microfinance approach when it comes to evaluating the business of the women and providing them tools to improve their business. So we do business planning for each individual entrepreneur. So all the entrepreneurs that we have today, we know exactly what their business is and how, where they invested, and we advise them on that. We also did a health insurance program at the same time. Kash today has one of the largest health insurance programs that covers over 3 million families, to 3 million individuals at the moment. We also segmented our loans. So we have livestock loans, we have education loans, we continue with the consumption loan, and we also have algorithms for assessing the credibility of through a credit scorecard that we use, which allows us to know which client is most likely to repay and which is not. We also use credit information bureaus, so the whole system is now digitalized. Everything is on tablets, and information is always transmitted online. So things changed for us, and of course then came COVID, then came the floods. But having survived the 2008 crisis gave us very thick skins. And today we know many of these crises are not things that you can't address, that you are able to address these challenges. And currently we have 608,000 clients. We have, as I talked to you about, insurance. We have 4,000 staff, 50% of whom are women. Overall, we have helped 5.5 million families. We've dispersed 778 million in loans, and we have trained over 2 million women. So what difference has this all made? Is microfinance the magic bullet for women's empowerment? Well, there are two kinds of. I'm going to talk a bit in binaries today with you. Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't, but I think today they might. There's always an in-between. So there are two kinds of microfinance providers. There is what we call the market-based microfinance providers and what we call the socially driven financial providers. The microfinance, market-based ones think that a lack of access to financial services is due to market failures. We all know the economics behind it. And therefore, a commercially driven approach is the best way forward. And that's where we will scale up, and we will provide credit services, microfinance services as a basic human right. On the other side are the ones that believe that microfinance is not a result of just market failures, but it is a result of social inequities that prevent access to finance. And therefore, we have to work on a transformation approach. And therefore, it's not just about economics. It's also about social change. So between these two ends, you will see, if you begin to map the various providers, you will see them. But the question from a women's angle is, will this give women control over strategic gender issues? Whether it's about autonomy, empowerment, decision-making, power, agency, control. Will it do that for them? That is the lens we have to wear to look at impact. And will microfinance help women with patriarchal risks, what we talked about in the beginning? My sense is this is more linked to the philosophy, the products, the services, the approaches, the transformational strategies, the investments that we do in women's lives. Because without that, we will not be doing the real microfinance that we need to do. So when we look at poverty, there's empowerment at one level, but there's also poverty, and there are two kinds of poverty. Again, as I said, we will, for the lack of time, we will talk about binaries. There is transitory poverty, which I talked to you about, when your income doesn't match your expenses. So that's consumption smoothing. What we've seen, and data will tell us, and we'll quickly walk through that, and then I'll hopefully stop. Transitory poverty is where you see greater impact. But when we talk about chronic poverty, where we need to see wealth accumulation, where we need to see income change, where we need to see productivity, that's a mixed bag. And that's where the RCTs told us that we weren't doing a good enough job. So like I said, we may have over-committed and over-promised. Microfinance doesn't work for everyone. Let me be very clear on that. Microfinance works for poverty reduction for what we call the working poor. It won't work for the poorest. And microfinance works for empowerment if it is within the DNA of the organization. So if we look at the microfinance climate segment very quickly, again, this is just for us for ideation. We have upper income and middle income, and then we have divided it into the working poor, which is the World Bank parameter of $2 to $4 a day, and then we have the destitute. It's really for the working poor that microfinance works best. The destitute, you will have to do either graduation schemes, or you will have to do cash transfers or conditional cash transfers. Like Pakistan has one of the best cash transfer programs in the world today, again evaluated by the World Bank, not by me, that works with the really poor and primarily with women-headed households. So we have to understand that microfinance is not the cup of tea for every poor household in the world. And if we have said that to you, we apologize and take it back. But coming back to research, so what have been the problems when we have been researching on the impact of microfinance? So one thing, as I said, it works best for the working poor. For lack of time, I will not really go through it, but there are two biases that have always plagued research methodologies for microfinance. One is, of course, the selection bias. Households that are more entrepreneurial will obviously use this. It's like what actuarial analysis and insurance tells you. There's a moral hazard or there's a selection bias. So anybody who's sick will be more likely to be part of health insurance. Similarly, anybody who's entrepreneurial, and how do you measure that? How do you measure intangible assets, or how do you measure intangible skills? Then there's non-random placement, because microfinance organizations will most likely go for the more poorer communities. They won't be in the, they'll go for the poorer slums. So these two biases, how do you overcome them? And that's really what research has been trying to address. So on one side we have, again, sorry, a binary. On one side we have the evangelists, where I belong, hopefully. And now today I even look like one, I think. It's the evangelists who say, yes, it will impact on poverty. Yes, it will impact on incomes. Yes, it will impact the economic welfare. Yes, targeted financial services will lead to more equitable growth. The wonderful Gini coefficient we use, that it will impact on that. And yes, it will also help. But we also say in this research that it will help the slightly better off poor, not the poorest of the poor. And the detractors say, no, we do nothing. We have no impact on the economic welfare or the well-being of individuals. And of course, women's empowerment, throw it out of the window. It's not going to work. So there we have the RCTs. So it's interesting. If you look at the history of microfinance, 2006, Dr. Yunus gets the award for the Nobel Peace Prize. And 2016, we have Esther Duflo, who are amazing, and Abhijit Banerjee, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, get the award for the RCTs, the award for economics. Amazing work they've done, but imagine here we are getting one for making the world a more peaceful place, and there we are saying it doesn't make a difference. So let's try and get our head around this. So I'm going to quickly talk about 3 types of research that have been done by the evangelists. One is a longitudinal study done by Khandekar and others in Bangladesh, looking at 10 years, where they looked at 87 villages and about 3,000 households. They tracked them. And what did they see? They saw, well, it does make, according to their data, and they used a fixed effect model to address this, to do away with the causalities and the endogeneity. And they discovered that it did lower poverty by 3%. But what they discovered was, which was very important, is that regular users of microfinance or regular clients had a greater impact than clients who had been using it irregularly. So one of the other parts of microfinance is, as I said, transitory poverty you can affect in a 1-year loan, and you can see the change. Because somebody who was managing consumption smoothing gets the money, uses it, and money is fungible, and gets over it. But if you're looking at change over a period of time where you want to see chronic poverty or real impact on poverty, it has to be longer term. What they also saw is that there was a change of 5% in incomes. Then we had quasi-experimental research, again done in Bangladesh, but this time in 20 villages. And this time it compared just existing clients with non-clients. And they again looked at clients with similar characteristics. However, you can, of course, you can critique this study by saying, how can you gauge entrepreneurial or risk-taking behavior of a household who would access the loans? But what they did do, which was interesting, they used longevity or access to microfinance over a period of time. And we do say that graduated lending makes a difference. You have to keep taking loans and then you get to the end. They use that as an independent variable. So the longer you stayed with the program, the greater the impact would be. And they discovered that, yes, it did make a difference, and this was significant. It reduced poverty by over 7%, and it increased consumption and income by the coefficients of 0.19 and 0.16. So according to them, this did make a difference, but they also mentioned that it was consumption smoothing that made a difference. And then there was another approach that has been used as panel data from different countries, 52 countries, and this was done in 2016, in which they looked at 52 countries to see if the Gini coefficient of those countries was which Gini measures income inequality, whether that improved as a result. And what they saw is that there were two indicators that needed to have an impact. One was the percentage of population in the country that had access to microfinance, obviously Bangladesh and India being up there on this, and the other was the size of the loan. Now, the size of the loan is very interesting, because the less money you have, what are you going to do with it? If it's not appropriately designed for the business or the productive enterprise that you have, what will the poor household do? Rationally speaking, they'll eat it. They'll use it for putting food on the table. So they said if the loan size is low, you're going to have less impact on poverty, and you're going to have less impact on the inequality of income. But if it's a loan that's appropriate for the business that you want to support, and that's why individual lending came in for us also. Because in group lending, you force everybody to get the same size of loan. You don't link it to the ability of the household to use it by their growth and their productivity. But in the individual lending case, you can do that. So that was an interesting thing that came out. But overall, what they said was that if you do away with all the endogenous factors, if you do away with all the exogenous factors, and we just look at microfinance and we isolate it through panel data, we will, across countries, there is an impact on poverty. And then we have the RCTs. Now, there are a couple of things I want to leave you on the RCT. The first is it was done with an organization, which was incidentally run by a woman, amazing woman, Padma G. Reddy. I've met her, wonderful, wonderful woman. She was running one of the largest programs, microfinance programs in India called Spandana. I haven't visited it, but at that time, they were growing really, really fast. But it was a minimalist program. What that means is they lent to women, but they really didn't care what was happening with the money. It was the transaction, it was not the transformation. So again, they did not invest in women in terms of leadership trainings, gender trainings, business development services, financial education, and so on and so forth, to change the mindset, which is what we do. For every client that we touch, we have to train them at least twice in the year on different things. And not only that, as I said, we also train their husbands. So, and this assessment was done within 18 months. As I have been mentioning, that if you want to see the change of microfinance, you have to do it longitudinally. They did do it 24 months later, but note, in a randomized control test, they chose 104 locations. 50% got the loan, and 50% did not get the treatment, like placebo in the medical industry. So, and they had a large enough sample. They had almost 7,000 participants in this study. But they did it 18 months into the use of the treatment, and they couldn't control who came in. So even in the non-treatment centers where the microfinance, in the locations where microfinance was not being provided, other practitioners could come in. They didn't stop them. So the waters did get a bit muddy on here. But according to them, they said it had no change on consumption. It did increase business investment. So they looked at it in three ways. They looked at business, they looked at the household, and then they looked at women. So at the household level, they said it made no difference. At the business level, they said it did increase, and 58% of the money went to women's businesses. So at least it was having a gender impact in that sense. They said incomes increased, but for the 85th percentile. What that means is the the households that were better off did better than the ones that were at a lower income threshold. They also said that microfinance didn't spread in these communities. Again, I would, as a practitioner, question that, because the spread of microfinance depends on the supply side. What is the plan and what is the approach of the organization? And they said this had no impact on health, education, or empowerment. So what about Kashf? What did we learn in Kashf? Very quickly, I know this is a bit of a difficult table to read, but I will highlight the key points. From the beginning of time, being a partial academic, or I've always been a researcher. That's where I started. Data has been very important to us, as I said. So from the beginning of time, we had impact assessments from 1996 also, which I've not put down here. But I've looked at the ones in the past 14 years, and what did they teach us? We basically did, and you can criticize this, but we are not an academic organization. We were doing this for ourselves to see where can we learn and what can we do. So we did a control group, which was basically clients who'd been with us for 6 months. We used them as the control group to do away with the selection bias. And we looked at clients who'd been with us for more than 2 to 3 years. And we compared the cohort groups. So what we discovered, and this is the methodology we've been using all along, other than 2019, which was prior to the loan, pre-loan, and post-loan. That was a different methodology. But the earlier ones were very similar to this. The N changed because the number of clients we had changed. So it varies from 250 and it goes down to 2,500 clients that we then, respondents in all the impact assessments. But generally what we saw is that incomes did change and improve for 30 to 40% of our clients. This varies across the years. We also saw that consumption patterns changed. The most important impact was on nutrition and food security. And that, again, is investment by the household and the women in the future of their families. And that's what we saw. You give a woman a loan, she invests it in a business, most of that money goes back, 80% of that money goes back into her children and her family, and 20% is saved. I don't have the numbers for men, but I'm sure those would be different. There has been data from West Africa by World Bank and other researches that I've seen. It says that men keep 40% of the money for themselves and 60% goes back to the family, but I stand corrected on this. The other thing that we saw is that decision-making capacity. So we saw incomes in our research that were changing. We saw investment in women's businesses that was improving. We saw nutrition, and then we saw decision-making capacity change also. So self-confidence, self-esteem, ability to make decisions, agency, control over money. Not always, but we did see in 3 of the 4 researches we have here where it was significant, the impact on women's economic entrepreneurship. And then we mapped domestic violence, because there is a negative side to familial relationships when it comes to microfinance. What we have learned over time that most quarrels and arguments and violence is generated over money matters in low-income households. That's when they escalate. So what we did see is that this did make a difference. Women said, now that we have the money in our own hands, we make the decision, we don't have to go and ask our husbands for it. We deal with it. And this has given us more wherewithal and economic agency. There's another way of looking at this, which you may not have seen before. That is, how profitable are the businesses that we invest in? So we have been doing an assessment of the average businesses that we support. It's catering, dairy, embroidery, grocery stores, beauty parlors, and stitching. And we've looked at subsistence. These are, by subsistence, it would mean if it was a dairy business, they only have 2 heads of herd. If it was non-subsistence, they would have 3 to 5 animals. If it's embroidery, its subsistence is self-employed, and non-subsistence is more than 2 individuals that they hire. So that's how the ranking is done. And when we look at the NPR ratios, if it's 10%, the business is doing okay. If it's over 20%, then it means the business is in good health. So one of the things we saw is that these small businesses that women fund, that we fund through the loans, are actually quite profitable because their turnaround time is very short. They're 3 to 4 months, and in a year they can turn them around over and over, at least 3 or 4 years, as long as they have access to loans. So recently we also have what we call a top-up loan, What that means is it's like a line of credit. So you've repaid 5 installments and 45% of your loan has been paid back. You can come to us and take another loan to help you with your business and to help you stem over or to look for another opportunity. But what we also realized is that these are averages, so the law of averages hide a lot. I'm sure you understand that from mathematics also. But what we did see, the laggards, the ones that were not doing so well, what were the reasons for that? Net profitability, what we discovered in the context of women entrepreneurs was first proximity to the markets. How close were they to the markets that they were going to sell in? Mobility of the female entrepreneur, access to raw materials, existence of the middleman, and most importantly is the unpaid care dimension that women have to face. And I think COVID made us all realize how important that is for women today. Now I'm going to take you to another completely different. I'm sure you know about, you just were all in the FIFA rush recently. I don't know how many of you knew that 70% of the footballs in FIFA were made by women in Pakistan. And another way of looking at impact is to see how women are contributing to the economy. So let me introduce you, and this is where I will stop in just a minute, to one of our clients who runs one of the most successful football making centers and the only one that's run by a woman. She has 10 children and 10 mouths to feed. And her husband, and again, what I've learned about women entrepreneurs in a low-income context is they will either be circumstantial entrepreneurs, because circumstances force them into it, or they will be serial entrepreneurs. They decided to do this. So Musarrat Baji is an entrepreneur of circumstance because her husband fell ill and couldn't work anymore, and she had 10 mouths to feed. And her son, incidentally, was working in one of these centers and making footballs. So she decided to learn the trade. And 8 years ago, she took a $55 loan from us and hired 8 women and produced 200 footballs in a month. Today, she took a $485 loan. Currently, that's outstanding with us. And she has upped her ante to 25 women who work for her. And she makes 600 footballs every month, which are A-class, top-class, approved and bought and then sold in the European market. So here's the story of Musarrat Baji that I want to leave you with, and my closing thoughts. It's like A Wrinkle in Time. I don't know how many of you read that book. I used to love it as a child. It tells us that you can see multiple solutions to one problem, and you can see them in different ways, in different times. I wish we could time travel. It will take us 132 years if we do nothing to overcome the gender parity gap in the world. We have to do something about it. We can be lost in the war of semantics, words, nomenclature, language over this. But I can tell you in my 30 years of doing development finance, this has been really one way where I have seen small miracles make a huge difference. So thank you again. I'm honored to be here. I'm sorry I took so much of your time. I was trying to keep it short, but thank you.
May I invite you here?
Yes.
Mrs. Zafar, thank you very much for this interesting and very stimulating masterclass about the journey of yourself and of Cash. So I think now is the time to have some questions from the audience. And so, as already explained, we have audience here in the room and there's audience online. I hope some questions will also come here on the iPad from the people who are following us online. For the moment, there are no questions yet, so we will give them some time and give the opportunity to the people in the room to ask questions. So you already heard the explanation that the technology used will be raising your hand, and there is somebody there, Wouter, with a microphone that can give you the microphone so that we can all hear you loud and clear.
I think I've answered all questions.
Apparently you impressed your audience.
Maybe it was my accent that wasn't audible or understandable. I don't know.
So are there no questions? Yes?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring talk. Along the way, you mentioned that you were primarily targeting women that were already entrepreneur. They already had a business. That's as far as I understood it. And that matched a little bit with the pyramid you showed, that these are the working poor. Is that really how it works? Would you also be able to help out people that just have an idea and not have a business yet?
Okay. That's a very good question. 70% of the investment that we do is for existing businesses, and 30% on average is for new businesses. So we don't have a limit on this. When I said circumstantial and serial, it's why women get into it. So there will be women, and sometimes we go into families where women are not working. Then we engage with them, we train them, we do business development, and most importantly, motivation with them. So many women, what we discovered, over 85% have done some business in the past and have had some experience. But how many of them actually get into running a business, that is 70-30. But when I say working poor, it's about people, households, low-income households that have income coming into the families, regular income, whether the husband's earning or the wife is earning or the son is earning. In our context, it's not a nuclear family. It's an extended family system. This is going to be a hard question.
I just was in South Africa and I heard about a project concerning HIV, AIDS, where in poor families, some were positive, and the difficulties to help the family in order to accept and to, in a way of solidarity, to accept that someone in the family need to take something, a medicine, each day. And it's only possible if the whole family is committed. Now, concerning your way of working, focusing on women, isn't this disturbing, solidarity of family? Concerning the position of men, isn't it taking a risk, bringing in quarrels, discussions in the family? You need to find a way to work together in family, just as they have to do with AIDS in South Africa. How to manage this?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, in the days of naivety, we assumed we could just speak to the women, we didn't have to talk to the men, and in our case in Pakistan, the mother-in-law. Because without the mother-in-law, you can't make any decisions, whether it's reproductive health. So for example, just to add to that, very recently we've started a program for reproductive health for women in our context for the clients, but we also train the mother-in-law. So you're absolutely correct. You cannot isolate the women from the structures that they work in, but you can work with people and engage with them. So when you bring in a microfinance loan in the family, you're actually adding to the income. And when you talk to the men and you say, well, she'll be earning and she'll be a helping hand, it makes sense. And in fact, I've met so many men who've said to me, why am I not allowed to cry or show my emotions? Because I'm supposed to be the macho man, I'm supposed to be masculine. This is during conversations we have with them on gender trainings. So for the men, we have these gender trainings where we begin the training by asking them, so what do you like to eat? So he'll say, I like biryani. I don't know how many of you know. It's the rice cooked in Pakistan, which is, I think, now internationally known. And then you'll say, well, who cooked it for you? And he'll say, my wife did. And then you'll say, well, why haven't you ever cooked? And then he'll look at you and say, well, that's what my wife is supposed to do. So these are conversations that we've started on gender roles, whether it's a man showing his emotion, and then men come up and they say, yes, you're right. If she's earning, I'm earning, things will get easier. So if it's a tangible, Dr. Herman, in our experience, if it's not just going out there and talking about women's rights and then leaving, then that's seen as an external agenda. But when you're going in there and you're saying, well, we have a solution for you, and the solution is poverty is an issue, you want to have a better life for your children, well, here's a way of doing it. Do you think you want to do that? And we'll engage with you. So then it gets easier. So we've not, just to answer your question, we work now in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is the northwest, the area adjacent to Afghanistan. And we run one of the most successful microfinance programs, in fact, the only microfinance program in Pakistan that targets women. And initially, when we went in, we thought, well, okay, this area, we're not going to be able to get the women. And let's start with the men, but we'll do a Sharia compliant, an Islamic product, because that's what people wanted. But you know, when we went in, 85% of the loans were used by women. We had thought maybe 30% would be used by women. So what we saw is once you engage and you have a product that is that relates to women's needs and is affordable and convenient and flexible and is offered in a way that, you know, you go to their homes, they don't come to you. In microfinance, we go to them. It's a high-touch approach. We motivate them. We provide the trainings. So they actually came forward and took it on. And the men were part of this too. Men who you would consider to be highly conservative and very patriarchal and misogynistic said to us, well, yes, this is working. So you'll have to navigate this. And as we learned from women in development doesn't work. It's gender mainstreaming and gender intentionality that will work at the end of the day.
Okay. Thank you. I think there were some questions over there and then here. Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I found the journey of your institution a very motivational success story. I have a concern related with the mindset change you mentioned. Since gender inequality goes beyond the lack of time and resources of women, what about the women that may appear to have a lack of entrepreneurship mindset or are unable to develop entrepreneurship?
Okay.
Are those being systematically excluded of the program?
Okay.
Or how is it
Question.
actually addressed in your Microfinance Plus approach?
Okay. So microfinance is just not about credit. Remember that. Finance includes savings, insurance, trainings, what have you. So for those that don't have an entrepreneurial mindset, they are the best money managers still. I mean, would you just put yourself in her shoes? $4, $2 a day, you have to feed the entire family. She is one of the best. I think she should teach at the Harvard Business School, really, seriously, because she knows how to manage her money. So money management is just not about loans. It's about savings. So you also, in microfinance, we also provide savings. And it's about insurance. So there are households at Kash, families, that we invest for the men, knowing full well that the women are not going to use the loan because we want the women to get health insurance. As I shared with you, inequality is not just about resource or economic inequality, it's about health and food security and reproductive rights. So we access those women, we provide loans, and we know that they're going to be used by the men to make sure that they have health insurance cover. And to give you an interesting example, we started the health insurance product, which covers the family, for 150 rupees. 150 rupees is like now 50 cents that they have to save up every month as part of their health insurance. They give us 50 cents a month to be part of the insurance cover. We thought it would cover men and women equally because the underlying cohort is 50% men and women in families, right, on average. That's how the population demographics work. But interestingly enough, when it came to the claims, they were used more by the women. 65% of the over 4 million claims that came in were used by the women. So we started researching this, and we discovered that women are the first ones to discount themselves. They say, there's scarce money, I will discount my health needs, and I will use that money to pay the educational fees or to pay the rent or what have you. So when the health insurance came in, they realized, oh, I don't have to delay my health expenditure anymore. The health insurance will cover that. So microfinance, we have to change from microcredit to financial services. And maybe, I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you. There were some more questions. There's also a question here, but I can take another one from the room, and then we can take the one. Actually, it's a question from a lender, so, but go ahead, Anne.
Thank you very much. It's very impressive, the impact I see of your work. My question is about the profile, the background of the women. You are working already a long time with this type of support and microfinance. I understood that women who are participating in your program have mainly no education or no intensive education. And I think now it's almost the second generation of women in your program. Do you see an evolution, another kind of background of the women who are participating in your program?
Yes, definitely the younger women are savvier, they're educated, and they'll have at least 10 years of schooling. The old cohort would have none or 5 years of schooling. They're also, the younger women clients we have are also savvier in digital solutions. So 30% of the 680,000 clients we have today have smartphones. Pakistan is very high on the telecommunications sort of space, so to speak. But women, there's a gender divide when it comes to access to telecommunications or to telephony or to smartphones. So the younger women will have smartphones. So what we are coming up now is with a smart app. The idea would be that you just download, you give us your credentials, and we will automatically approve the loan, and then the business development officer will come to your house and do the rest of the checks that are needed. So we are doing that for the younger cohort, but the older cohort is still very scared and not so savvy with using of technology. But we are still, 40% of our clients, we have now handheld them to open mobile accounts. So that they can transfer their money, remit their money to us, the transactions in terms of installments over that. So yes, that continues, and most of our training methodologies are still, adult learning based. So they're storytelling, they're role models, and we've also been using another, you have to come around at patriarchy in like Chinese torture. So we also have a media campaign that we do. I had visited Dominican Republic about a decade and a half ago and seen how they have used the power of media and telenovelas or soap operas to change mindsets. So we have produced almost 5 best-of-class soap operas in Pakistan on women's issues, from child marriage to child sexual abuse, to girls' education, to the economic empowerment of women, to gender norms, which is our current soap opera that's on the main media channels in Pakistan. The idea being that this is everyone's issue, unless or until we begin to change, and everybody can make a difference in women's lives, as long as we begin to realize and hold up a mirror and say, well, we need to change our attitudes first.
Okay, so as I said, there is a question, and also congratulations from a social investor here from Belgium. And also there are several other greetings and congratulations for Mrs. Zafar on the chat. But the question of the lender is actually what your advice would be to lenders and funders of microfinance who want to promote gender equality.
I think that's an excellent question. My belief is unless you measure it, it'll never be done. So gender desegregated data would be one of the first things. For any investment that you do, you must make sure that you see, as I was saying, to be gender intentional and know what results you want to see. So you need to hold the organization accountable for those. So that would be the first. The second would be, of course, in terms of the products and services that are being offered. How effective are they? And minimalist is good in terms of scale, but it may not be good in terms of, when I say minimalist, it's just the transaction piece of microfinance. May be good, but we need to invest in the value chain for women if we really need to make a difference. So that, I would say, combine, in an ideal world, if I was in Hogwarts today and I had a magic wand, I would say combine your financing with technical assistance that gives the wherewithal, that invests in women, because you will have to handhold. The third thing is realize that digital has the opportunity of changing. We know how AI is changing the world. Digital and microfinance can change the world, but it's not the only answer. We can use algorithms, we can set up credit scorecards, but sometimes they leave women behind. So we also need to be aware of that as an industry. So I think those were my suggestions.
Thank you. Go ahead at the back.
Yes. Well, congratulations, first of all, for the journey that you had with the Cash Foundation. It's really impressive. And my question was related with lenders also, indeed, because I come from Nicaragua, and so we had a very vivid microfinance sector, but it also confronted huge crisis. And when this crisis enters, you have quite tenses relationship that can happen with lenders. In the story you show, it looked like something quite smooth, no? You say, yes, we enter in this crisis, we're able to pay, and we just were able to rethink ourselves about what we were doing and what was happening. What we have seen in Nicaragua is when this crisis enters, sometimes the lenders stop being lenders and start being part of the institution. They start being part as equity capital owners and shareholders, and therefore to also be part of the decisions that we take within the organization. So my question is, how as this happens for the Cash Foundation, what are the consequences in terms of the liberty that you really have to take decisions about your policies for any kind of work you are doing in the field with the women?
Okay, so in 2008, we only had one major lender, so we weren't spread that far. We had a local lender that the World Bank had set up called the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. So, of course, they were very close to the field and they could see what was happening. And they gave us a grace period of a year to repay them back. So they were very much part of this. But if we had multiple lenders at that time and we had to meet their needs, I'm sure it would have been much harder. So your question, I guess, is what are some of the good practices that microfinance needs to do in the time of crisis? I think what we learned over and over again, whether it was COVID, whether it was the huge floods in Pakistan in 2000 and last year in 2022, we realized that customer contact is very important. You have to keep in touch with your customer. You have to give each customer the opportunity to either reschedule or recapitalize or give them grace periods. And now technology allows you to do that. In 2008, that was very tough. Now, of course, we can keep in touch with our clients much faster. The other thing is keep your lenders and your debtors informed of the situation on the ground. Use your data well. In 2008, we didn't really have, and the other thing we learned from that was we didn't really have the information on our fingertips. Now, of course, we use business intelligence systems, and we have, we can slice and dice the data, and we know exactly where delinquency is going. You also need to look at the macroeconomic situation. That's also very important. So coming back today in Pakistan, we have a huge inflationary crisis there, and it is affecting our clients. So as a result, we are giving them new products to help them stem this period. So I think those would be the 4 or 5 lessons.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we still have time for one short question and a short answer.
Okay, short answer. Okay.
So I think there was one question there for a long time already raising the hand, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'm patient. Yes, thank you for the very interesting lecture. I had a question about the comment you made about time spent or unpaid time spent in caring for families. And in Belgium, we also have very politically sensitive conversations and discussions about daycare because research has shown that when daycare is not available, women often stay at home and lose opportunity to gain money. Is that something that you investigated as well?
Okay, a good question. I will answer it from the institutional perspective. In the beginning, I gave you a statistic. 20% of women in Pakistan are in the formal labor force. 65% graduate out of universities. There seems to be a conundrum here. There's a conflict, right? Women are not being translated into the formal labor force. So at Kash, as I mentioned to you, we have 4,000 staff. They come from very low, backward regions of the country because that's where we work. And we realized that we were losing our female staff as a result because we didn't have those facilities for them. We were doing the maternal, we were giving them maternity leaves. We were doing all of that, but that wasn't enough. So we run 2 programs. One is we have daycare facilities, but they don't pay for it. The organization invests in it because it is the responsibility of the organization. So we have daycare facilities across, we have over 400 branches, and 50% of them have daycare facilities. When the staff requires it, we provide it. And it has a person who's taking care of the kid child while the mother is working, and has the safe environment for them as well. The other program we do is, it's a funny term we use, it's not without my mother-in-law. And I mentioned to you, mother-in-laws are very important. So what we started seeing is that when a woman in our cohort, in our staff was getting married, the life cycle change was happening, the in-laws would protest and say she shouldn't work anymore. So what we do is we call the in-laws, potential in-laws, for tea at the office. And we say, well, look at this environment. This is very safe and secure for your daughter-in-law. She'll have dignity of work, dignity of self-worth, and she'll not be harassed, because we are very, very careful about this. And there will be daycare facilities available. So you have to socially engineer everything if you really want to make a change. So to answer your question, we don't do it in the field for the clients, but we do it as an institution for the staff.
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting questions. We could continue this interesting conversation for some time more, but there are other important things to be done. So I now pass the floor and we can go and sit there.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Mrs. Zafar for this very interesting and inspiring masterclass, and also thank you, the people online and the people here, for your questions. It is now time to confer the honorary degree for general merit on Ms. Roshaneh Zafar. Rector Herman van Goeten will deliver the laudation, and after that the honorary doctor can give her own word of thanks.
Dear you all, this is the important moment of conferring the honorary doctorate. As you understood already, Mrs. Roshaneh Zafar is a pioneer in the field of economic and social empowerment of women in Pakistan. And Mrs. Zafar's life history is also illuminating about the choices she made. She grew up in Lahore in Pakistan, and her father was an important politician. Her maternal grandfather was a renowned musician. And in the privileged environment in which she grew up, she received the same upbringing as her brothers. After finishing secondary school in Lahore, she was allowed to study in the United States at the University of Pennsylvania, and during that time, she also went to Harvard. She earned a master's degree in development economics from Yale University to return in Pakistan in 1990, when she started her career, as you know, in the Pakistan section of the World Bank. Meeting Mohammed Yunus, the Nobel laureate, she founded in 1996 the microfinance institution, the Kashf Foundation in Lahore. And this institution provides microcredits to Pakistani women from economically marginalized households in mainly rural areas with low levels of education, constrained mobility, and limited health care. Gender centricity is nowadays an integral part of the mission of Kashf. Women in Pakistan, it has to be said, face a myriad of challenges which are exacerbated by patriarchal norms and practices. There is widespread systemic discrimination against women at all levels, which restricts their economic, social, and political progress. The Kashf Foundation aims to create through microfinance a poverty-free and equitable gender society via free and unhindered access to financial services. Women can borrow at Kashf an amount for their own entrepreneurship instead of giving it, by example, directly to their husbands. And in order to help these women borrowers gain confidence in their financial management capabilities, Cash offers financial education trainings that build clients' capacities to undertake budgeting, savings, debt management, and financial transactions. These are designing using adult pedagogy methods so clients with little or no education can also participate in these. Similarly, to address gaps in business planning and business management, Cash offers business accelerator trainings with sessions on product diversification, product marketing, income diversification, and in-person visits to markets and relevant vendors for buildings of linkages. These trainings also connect women working in the same trades to each other and encourage them to visit markets as groups. To counter existing patriarchal norms and narratives that limit women borrowers, Cash works with communities through interactive social theater performances on, by example, importance of girls' education, discouraging child marriages, women inheritance, and COVID prevention strategies. At a broader level, Cash works with mainstream media via public awareness campaigns and television series to create awareness about issues that impact its women borrowers. Moreover, Cash has produced and aired 4 television series covering a myriad of issues faced by women, highlighting positively women's economic and social contributions to society and creating female role models, as Roshaneh is itself. Till yet, as we saw, 5.5 million women were helped in the context of entrepreneurship. 2 million women were trained in financial knowledge. About 77 billion euros were distributed. This did not only contribute to female entrepreneurship, it also changed largely the mindset of these women and their families and communities. 1 woman on 2 has a better relation with her husband. 1 woman on 2 has more and better food for the family. 66% of the consumers have better self-confidence. 69% of the women have more to say in the family budget. Dear Mrs. Zafar, if I would have been really your supervisor on your ordinary PhD, I would have said, Mrs. Zafar, you are working in the field, that's nice, that's what you have to do, but you have also to develop a methodology. But what we heard today, what we saw today, also proved that methodology is in the heart of your business, that you are studying, analyzing, working out a new approach. And today, therefore, Mrs. Roshaneh Zafar is solemnly proclaimed not only doctor, but even more, Doctor Honoris Causa at the University of Antwerp. Dear Mrs. Zafar, may I invite you to the solemn award, please. By decision of the Executive Board, the University of Antwerp confers upon Mrs. Roshaneh Zafar, founder and managing director of Cash Foundation, the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa for general merit for her outstanding role as a development activist. Mrs. Zafar is a pioneer in the field of economic and social empowerment of women in Pakistan. She set up a microfinance organization the Cash Foundation in order to create a gender-equitable society via free and unhindered access to financial services. As a result of her work in women's economic empowerment, Mrs. Zafar has served on multiple global agenda councils. She plays a crucial role to create a poverty-free environment in Pakistan with equal rights and opportunities for women. Really, thanks for this. Hereby, I confer you the Medal of the University of Antwerp and also the diploma in this beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored.
Maybe for the photograph. Oh, just for the photograph. Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, sir. Such a privilege and an honor.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. We are so happy and honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And now? And now?
They have to. Thank you.
If Mrs. Zafar wants to share a word of thanks herself, then you can do it now if you want to. Okay.
You guys have heard enough. Thank you. Well, it's Rector Herman, thank you so much. It's such an honor and a privilege to be conferred this degree, which I never thought I'd get in my life. As I told you, I wanted to pursue a PhD, but I never did, and world took over and life took over. This degree is really it's a privilege to be representing the women entrepreneurs, the micro-entrepreneurs of Pakistan. This degree is really for them. I want to thank all the women who are resilient, they persevere, and they make a difference for their families. I want to thank the KASH staff, the business development officers who go every day spreading the word of hope. I want to thank my family, my husband, my parents, who supported me through thick and thin, and who always knew that I'd never take no for an answer. So thank you again.
I would like to finish this evening by saying a few words of thanks myself. Thank you very much to you, Mrs. Zafar, for all the incredible work you are doing, for coming to Antwerp to accept the honorary degree. And next to this strong woman is a great husband, Mr. Hassan Kausar. Thank you for joining our ceremony today. And we have a small but very delicious and typical Antwerp present for you. Thank you, of course, to Rector Herman van Goetem. Thank you to the University of Antwerp. And finally, of course, I'd also like to thank you for all joining us this evening. I wish you all a good night at a very delicious reception.